I'm talking about. Don asked me to give a critical, and it's a very critical commentary on this book by Seidule called Robert E. Lee and Me, which is a very interesting title, which I'll be talking about. Philip Lee, who's not here, has a very good video on what accompanied this book, and that was a video where Seidule, dressed in his dress blues, general, giving a talk saying that his alma mater, Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, needs to drop the name of Lee because Lee was a traitor. And he gives this authoritarian statement that this just has to be done, that we all know, we meaning all the reigning historians know, that Lee was a traitor, and his name has no business on the. Philip Lee, who sits at the table here, has a very good video refuting it. I'm going to touch upon a couple of the refutations, but other than that, I'm interested in what kind of book this is. Where does it come from? How did something like this get to be? I'm going to say it's a collapse of 40 to 50 years, I would judge, of what I call the reigning historians, whether they be straight professionals or academics, that allows for shoddy scholarship is what we have. And so titles like Robert E. Lee and Me, I think that all of these historians sort of take what they assume is the moral high ground. They are there to tell us that this was about slavery and nothing but slavery, with the sometimes stated, but usually it's an undertone that if you don't agree, then you just don't know how bad slavery was, or you're just innocent and you can't comprehend the evil of slavery. That sort of thing is the overtone. So, and that's where the me comes from. Somebody who could title a book, Robert E. Lee and Me. I count too. Me too. I'm moral too. That's, I hate to do it, but that's what this looks like. So that's what I'm up to. Where does a book like this come from? It came I started out my career and I'm still in the philosophical theology, and I had to watch the same collapse slowly over the years until we came to this group who call themselves the New Atheists. People want to write books about atheism. That's okay with me as long as they make a good case. A case that hangs together. It doesn't mean that it's right, but those people don't know what they're doing. They just run and now history, Civil War history, has the same sort of collapse here. That's what I'm up to. Okay, Robert E. Lee and Me. When I came up with the title, which will be clear at the very end, when Don and I were talking about what I might title this talk, and it's Robert E. Lee and Y'all. I liked the title and I stuck with it, but I really liked the first one that I had, which was the Me generation looks at the Civil War. Well, I thought it was funny. So you learn how to do that when your students don't laugh at your jokes. You can always get a laugh when you say that. Anyway, most of this book is technically what we would call an apologia pro vita sua, an account of one's life. Yes. That is here. It's absolutely gratuitous. It doesn't add up to anything. And that's why I'm making such a big deal about the me in the title. It just seems to want to be there. Anyway, it's an account of his life, but it's also a confession, which was another title that I considered. It's called Confession, No Worries About Contrition or Penance. Yeah, thought that was funny too. But as you consider this odd liturgy, you see that contrition and penance are not needed at all because it's a confession from somebody who is a victim. He's a victim because he grew up in the deep South city of Arlington, Virginia. A stone's throw across the Potomac River, for those of you who don't know Arlington. And he was lied to about the South. He's an absolute victim. Here's how he was lied to. He was raised in a Southern home where Lee and Jackson were revered. Now that's child abuse, if you ask me. Shoot, I don't have a hanky. I was going to pass it out if anybody needed it. His parents read Uncle Remus to him. I kid you not. And then this is where I get interested because he's a number of years younger than I am, and I'm from Charlottesville, which is right in the center of the state, and we went through the same schooling, public schools that started out segregated. Pardon me, and for me in the third grade, they were blacks finally came to Venable School, one of the grade schools in Charlottesville. For him, this is a gut-wrenching experience. For me, and I was talking to one of the black little girls who came to Venable that day. We had a sort of a Zoom chat with a bunch of old Venable School people, and I said, you know, the worst thing, Sandra, was that camera from Channel 6 News in Richmond. There were no TV stations in Charlottesville in those days. It followed her and her mother walking to school up 14th Street. The camera followed that little child all the way. And I said, to me, that was the worst part of that whole. Other than that, you know, people went to school, but this is some horrendous experience, life confusing for Professor Seidule. There was lots of Lee lore and Southern tradition at Washington and Lee, where he went to school. He goes on and on into it, and memorials were at West Point. So this is a tragic life that he had to lead, and he's confessing his waywardness. But since he's a victim, there's no need for confession. I'm mentioning this not to be clever, and I've told a couple that I have no interest in being. I just don't see the point. I don't see the point other than he wants to give a statement about his life. I think in some ways he's trying to blame all of this on Robert E. Lee, which is, I mean, if he wants to write a book about school desegregation in Virginia, that's fine. I'd like to read it. I was involved in it. Oh. This book is the result of a film he made wearing his dress blues, giving expert advice, as it's put, to Washington and Lee alums, and he's one of them, to remove Lee's name from the university and to condemn him as a traitor. In talking about the just host of emails that he got after this film was viewed, many of them negative. Again, poor guy. I'm kidding you not. He said, and a lot of them were trolling his looks. My wife, I won't do it, but my wife did the gag move when I told her, when I told her about that. They trolled his looks, and at this point, I think that any decent person would just throw the book in the trash, because it looks like he is up to major deception, which he is. His life story doesn't add up to anything. It doesn't add up to a victimization whereby he really needed to go to confession, he was such as, this is the worst of it, the major deception. And I think that if we have read a lot of the major works that that have come out in the last 40 years, we see things like this. But this is he's very good at this deception. Lee believed he's talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, and he says Lee wrote that Lee believed abolitionists had, quote, neither the right nor the power, end quote, to force the South to change. Another reason for choosing secession was his hatred of abolitionists because they promised to end the South's social system of slavery. During the war, Lee's actions and words about enslaved people also show that he fought the war to maintain slavery. On January 10th, 1963, Lee wrote to the Confederate Secretary of War after the publication of the Emancipation Proclamation, calling it savage and brutal policy which leads us no alternative but success or degradation, which is worse than death, if we would save the honor of our families from pollution, our social system from destruction. That letter stands as the most damning indictment of Lee's belief in slavery. Here Lee discusses what will happen if the United States wins and emancipates African Americans. Most of us know what the Emancipation Proclamation really was and why Lee is saying this. For those of us who don't know, it didn't free anybody. As Shelby Foote says, if you could reach out and touch the black person, you could. They weren't going to be free. The four slave states that remained in the Union throughout the war, the slaves were not freed. If you read the whole thing, it says they're not freed. The ones that are freed are the ones that Lincoln had no control of. He said, "You're all." And so, what did he do it for? Well, one, he wanted to make the war officially. He had finally had somewhat of a in the war in the East. When the Battle of Antietam was fought to a draw. The other, so that he would make the war officially a war to end slavery, even though it didn't free anybody. The other reason was that with these marches across Georgia and up into South Carolina, which were totally against women, children, and slaves. Horrible events. We all know Sherman marching through Georgia. That would be allowed because those slaves are freed and they must be set free. The other was to encourage slaves to think that they are free but still in bonds, and so they need to go murder their master and mistress, and they need to poison wells and do different things. That's what Lee's talking about. He's not talking about a land with no slavery. I'm used to reading that kind of thing, but when it comes from somebody as clumsy as this fella, who has given us no reason to think that he has been brainwashed, and then he goes and does it. There's another one. It can even get pretty funny on page 12. During the 7 Days Battle in June 1862, Lee had saved Richmond, defeating the United States General George McClellan with a furious, bloody assault. Lee, furious, bloody assault against this general. Can you imagine? What was the 7 Days War? If you know Route 295, the northern bypass around Richmond, if you know that was Lee's battle line. He had some 25. I'm going to use Shelby Foote's numbers. He had some 25,000 soldiers on that crescent. McClellan had 68,000. coming down trying to take over Richmond, and there were 32,000 behind that backing him up. So roughly 100,000 people against Lee's 20-some thousand people. And Lee kept Richmond safe. So it goes roughly from Gaines's Mill on the left all the way over to Malvern Hill on this side, that crescent, and Lee kept them. Lee kept them out, but this is just called a bloody attack against McClellan. Fort Sumter, secessionists fire on U.S. property and seize it. That's Fort Sumter. Those are his words on Sumter. What happened briefly? If you went into Charleston and looked out of the harbor and you'd never seen it before, bear in mind this left here. You're right, but you see the Charleston harbor, and way over here on the left side is Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island. And over Christmas of 1860, while Charlestonians were celebrating Christmas, which they can really do, a federal garrison spiked the guns at Moultrie and moved silently overnight to Sumter, where they had the city straight in the crosshairs. They were staring the city straight in the face. All of this was against the conversations that were going on between the Confederate leadership and Washington, that there would be no attempt to move the garrison, and that soon the garrison would leave. They were running out of food, and soon they would leave. They would not be reinforced in any way. Well, they were. They were reinforced. And there's a letter which you can probably find at Barnes & Noble. It's not hard to find, where the head of the garrison, Major Robert Anderson, writes a letter saying, "I'm not at all interested in starting this war." It's going to happen. And even Horace Greeley of the New York Trib said the South had no choice but to fire first. They had no choice but to do it. And it's on record. I've never found the source myself, but I've seen it quoted a number of times that Lincoln was overjoyed that his scheme worked. That he worked. If anybody has the source, call it out during Q&A. So it said the seriously speaking, the North fired first and started the war. But this is the South fired on United States property and took it. Fortunately, the administration at Washington and Lee was so afraid that donors would cut off his water, which they would have done. I know a lot of very, very mad graduates and faculty and students who are there right now who would have, that's it, no more giving. He does not even mention, as none of them do, the Corwin Amendment, that amendment which, as Lincoln was in office and was going through Congress steadily, which would have not only prohibited the government from interfering with slavery, but would have made it so that you could not amend the Constitution to prohibit slavery. It was moving gingerly through. Lincoln gives his complete approval of it during his first inaugural. What we're seeing here are not just the basic facts, but the crucial facts. Completely left out. What is that? That makes for a story that's not going to work out. You can't tell the story of the war unless you do this, and unless you mention these few and many, many more. So what do you get then? You get the histories that we are so used to reading, we don't see what's happening to us. And that is that the characters must be stuck characters. In some writing that I'm doing, when Lincoln walks on stage, so to speak, in the latest history book, he's already the great emancipator. And Davis is already the evil one who would wreck the founders' union in order to protect slavery. He's already that. I even had a and one of my colleagues, we'll leave it at that, who has written some of these books, and he told me one day that it wasn't until he was well into graduate school that he realized that the people he was looking at in the 1840s and 1850s and had no idea that a war was coming. Like he knew, or which side was going to win. He had everybody. Well, of course, as I said, Lincoln was the great emancipator the moment he walks on stage. That's all you need to know. You know that, and you know how the story's going to turn out. So what we are looking at then, given that last comment, is the nadir of Civil War history as we've known it. I would judge for the last 40 to 50 years. Before, it was always, slavery was always, as it should be, something that we need to talk long and hard about and try to understand and see how it was involved in the war. But not everybody, as we've begun used to, was saying, folks, it's slavery, grow up, lose your innocence. If you don't agree, then you're still an innocent child, or you don't know how bad slavery really was. This also this book is the nadir of a kind of text that wants to do two things. One, it wants to make you really mad, really, really mad, and then it wants to leave a lot unexplained. So you get your dander up. You're mad at them Confederates. You're mad that they're doing this, and you're mad that and to the point where you really don't have the whole story told, and you don't really ask for it because you've given enough to get involved in the story. That man attacked that poor McClellan viciously at the Battle of the 7 Days. Which then gives the reader the inclination not to ask the hard questions, not to ask for the hard facts, not to do thorough research, not to read. I mean, right now, Civil War history for the past 40 years comes in two different columns, one by the pros and the leading academics, and the other by people who publish in small presses, or they're self-published, or all these sorts of things, and this side never listens to what this side is saying. They just ignore it. Now, what makes a book like this possible, and all the others for the last 40 years of which this is the collapse, is something which called the myth of the lost cause. And I think that many of you probably know what that is, but if they do confront a fact or a situation which directly contradicts what they've been saying, you're lost causing, bud, it doesn't count. You're singing the myth of the lost cause, and you're ruled out of court right there. Now, people have told me not to get too technical about this, but I am, because this is despotism. This is beyond academic despotism. This is lying to the people. And if you lie to the people, Cicero said, you don't have a people any longer. And we're beginning to realize that we're losing our selfhood as a people. Some think it's lost already. This has several. This myth of the lost cause accusation has several steps to it. One, they refer to books and songs. They really never name, maybe Uncle Remus, but that's as far as they go, about happy slaves singing in the moonlight. And it's not true, they say, and that never happened, and it's a cover by Southerners to keep people from seeing the evils of slavery. Oh, they sang in the moonlight, and they did all this sort of stuff. That's one stage, and there are other books that they'll point to, but I need to move on. This is a big one that after the war, Confederates all said that they fought because of the tariff, because of the nature of the Union, which they believed in, because of other things, but not slavery. Whereas if you check it out, before the war, they all said, we fought to protect slavery. all said it. Follow those things out sometime and you'll come out with some really interesting findings. I think they think that most readers, and they're probably right, will not follow that up. Well, I did. And there's, one of the big ones is James McPherson of Princeton comes right out and says that after the war, in his memoirs, the Decline and Fall of the Confederate Government, President Davis said that it was that the South Southern states were never given their rights, that it was because of the tariff, it was other things like that. But before the war, he said it was slavery. Well, if you check that out, he never said, he tried to give an account of slavery. That's another, whenever you see defense, think account. People are trying to say where it came from, what it's doing, what does it look like. That's really what they're doing, whatever side they take, whatever thesis they've got going. But there's one major statement that Senator Davis said in 1859 in response to a Southerner, a Senator Lazarus Powell, and Powell said, "Look, what the South needs is they need to have a federal presence in every southern state to protect their rights, because it's getting heated, war is going to break out, and we need this military federal presence to protect our rights." Davis said, "Absolutely not." Davis stood up and he said, "Absolutely not, because that's not the Founders Union. It can be." As he said at Faneuil Hall in Boston, that there's the only thing that holds the Union together is the agreement, is honor, that you honor the agreement that you made. That no outside force can control it. That's going to become very important at the end of my talk here. The last stage of the accusation, myth of the lost cause, is that you can really just rule out anything that you don't agree with as lost causing. This is in a library, in a major university library where I have worked and where I was a student. They put on a display of William Faulkner's books. William Faulkner was writer in residence at Virginia for a number of years in the late 50s. So they put on display some of his books, and there's volume 1 of Lee's Lieutenants, written by the great historian Douglas Southall Freeman. And underneath it, the little statement about it says, "A good example of the myth of the lost cause." In other words, don't read it. They may as well have just said, "Don't read this book." Now, this has been tried before, this independent standard that judges all truth claims. And the most telling and the most damning, and the one that was defeated the worst was, completely and thoroughly, was philosophers of science. Very, very, very few scientists themselves actually said these sorts of things, but that empirical verification is the standard for truth claim. So, it's sunny outside. We can all check it out. Or we can look in a cloud chamber, to see what the empirical thing is. All other speech. This was the group called themselves the logical positivists, and they reigned in the 40s and the 50s, 30s to some extent. All other speech is good, it's fine, but it is nonsense. Doesn't make any sense. So we have to have moral arguments. We have to talk about, our favorite books. We know, what does the Red Badge of Courage mean, and these. But you have to note one thing, that it's nonsense. Poetry doesn't make any sense. Only empirical verification makes sense. This was blown out of the water by a scholar who was mainly in the history of ideas, but he came out and he wrote his own textbook called, if I didn't write it, my memory's fading. I'll get it out. It's Tapes on Search. Conflicts and Categories. Sorry, Sir Isaiah Berlin, Berlin. And in one essay, which is called Verification, he makes several really good arguments, but the final one, and this is a direct quotation, is that verification is a function of intelligibility, not vice versa. You know, it's that simple, that you cannot come up with a standard which judges all intellectual, intelligible statements that are made, because it itself is made by you know, the human brain, the human intellect. So that's as technical as I'm going to get. But everybody, I mean, the thesis, this sort of despotism still reigns, but it is completely been exposed. I talked to my science friends. I was walking to my car one evening with a world-famous botanist, and I told him. He said, "What do those people say?" And I told him. He said, "Good Lord, I spend most of my time in my lab. I have no idea what I'm doing." You know, he's just, you know, trying to get it to work out right. So we cannot construct independent routes of verification like the myth of the lost cause, so that the things that are the claims that are made don't need any discussion. They're ruled out of court, right there. So, you know, in 1860, one of the South's great theologians said that this war was going to be mayhem. It's going to be worse than what Louis XIV did to the Rhine, the Loire Valley. Now, if he'd said that after the war, that'd be lost causing. Immediately. But the good thing, he couldn't have said it after the war because he died 8 months into the war. Thornwell died. So that just stands there, said early on, that this is going to be a war like none other, as like the world has never seen, as Davis said. And this is what undergirds this collapse here of the historiography that we've been reading, at least I have, for the last 40 years. So it sets up the only possible story, and I'm going to close here, that can be told. It's got to be made up of stock characters, or the myth of the lost cause would not work any longer. It's got to be, you know, black hat, black horse, white horse. After he goes through gratuitously his biography, he says, "Now I'm prepared to prove, and you will have to believe me, because you know my story, that Lee was a traitor, absolute traitor." And he simply gives the normal, you know, he made an oath to the to the federal government, and then he backed out and he fought against the United States, and he killed American soldiers. I don't want to, you know, we can spend the rest of the time, and I want to end in a minute and get your thoughts on this. I'm sort of somewhat embarrassed for being so clever, but I don't know what to do with a text like this except to call it a complete collapse of what we've been reading for the last 40 years. If Lee was a traitor, if the colonies had lost the war with Britain, who would be traitor? Jefferson, Franklin, Washington, all of them. My ancestor, Arthur Middleton. Traitors. So, you know, if Lee is a traitor because he believes, let me back that statement up. In the notes to the Constitutional Convention, James Madison wrote that if a state attacks another one, or this fragile central government attacks another state, the Union is over. It's dissolved. Because it can't be held together by power. It can only be held together by agreement, which means, for these gentlemen, honor. That's what holds it together. If there's an outside power like Senator Powell wanted, federal presence in every state, the Union is dissolved. And that's why Senator Davis said, absolutely not. Well, we won't have that. If he had said, yeah, good idea, that will protect slavery, well, then McPherson's got a case against him. But he didn't. He didn't say that at all. So when Lee says this, a couple of times prior to the war, he was hanging out and trying to see exactly how bad this was going to get before he had to make a comment about whether he was going to have to join the Southern cause. He wanted to see how things were going to play out. But after the war, he said just what I said. If the Union is held together by force, there's no Union. If a state attacks another one, the Union is over. All states return to their sovereignty. Well, that's wrong, because they never lost their sovereignty. They just delegated, not transferred, certain powers. So that's the story here, and that's the most damning thing about this book, which I'm mighty glad that Don asked me to talk about. Yeah, Washington would have hung too. If you want to hang Jefferson Davis from a sour apple tree, you can hang Washington too. That's the consequence of your belief. So I'm finished. Thank you very much.